What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So you may have heard a pop, clunk, squeak, hum coming from the front of your Toyota truck or SUV. I think we all have at some point. The components that make up our steering and suspension are constantly being exposed to, movement, friction, weight, abuse, and eventually, like everything else, they fail. So today we're going to walk through all of the suspension components. We're going to talk about the different noises and how to pinpoint and diagnose the issue. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, relax, and let's dive in. All right, so let's jump right into it. Let's start going over the basic components of our front suspension system. All right, so under our rotor here, inside we'll have our wheel bearing. It'll be connected to our hub. So this is our control arm here on the bottom. Our control arm is connected to our frame in two locations, and where it's connected, we have bushings. Our lower control arm will also have a ball joint on the bottom here. All right, so we have our lower control arm down here, and we have our upper control arm up here. They're both connected with the steering knuckle, which is in the middle here, and this is our upper ball joint. So the lower control arm and the upper control arm controls the movement up and down for the suspension. We have bushings back here for the upper control arm, just like we did on the lower control arm. All right, this component right here is called your tie rod. It has its own joint on the outside here, and it has a joint on the inside. The job of our tie rod is to control our steering, so it moves our wheel back and forth. It is also connected to the knuckle, just like the upper control arm and the lower control arm. All right, so here we have our sway bar. Our sway bar is connected to our steering knuckle as well, and it's connected with these end links. These end links have two joints on them. The job of the sway bar is to basically keep the vehicle more level on the ground to enhance our steering. All right, so here we have our shock. Our shock is mounted to our lower control arm. Our shock's job is basically to absorb those impacts. So we do have a bushing down here, and the shock comes up and it's in its shock mount, which is basically bolted onto the frame. All right, and here we have our CV axles. We have an inner boot and an outer boot, and then the axle here. CV stands for constant velocity. These are constant velocity joints. This basically allows movement of the wheel, but also allows it to turn, or it drives power to the wheels. You will find this on four-wheel drive vehicles and front-wheel drive vehicles. All right, so any of these parts can wear out or get damaged, and they're usually the culprits behind those annoying noises. Some of these are easy to pinpoint, while others can be more challenging. It doesn't hurt to have a partner assist you with this. It can actually really help, and a cheap $10 mechanic stethoscope like this one. If you're interested in picking one of these up, I will leave a link in the description. You will also need something to pry with. We are going to use this pry bar to check for play. So let's get started. Let's work on the outside, and we'll work our way in, going through how to assess each of these components. All right, so wheel bearings. So if your wheel bearing is going bad, you will first likely notice a humming or howling type sound that gets louder as you go faster. If it gets really bad, you might even notice what feels like loose steering on the highway, especially after you change lanes. Now, to assess this in the garage and to rule out other components, you will want to first block your opposite wheels. So we'll block our back wheels, we'll jack up our vehicle and place jack stands under our frame, and then we'll lower the vehicle down to support it. Okay, you can now grab your wheel at the 3 o'clock and the 9 o'clock position, and we'll just kind of rock back and forth. Now there will be some play as the steering components kind of move around, but what we're looking for is kind of a clunking sound or a clicking sound. And I don't really feel any going back and forth here. Now, of course, if you do feel some movement, it could be your tie rod ends. So to rule that out, we'll now grab our wheel at the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position, and we'll rock back and forth. And what we're feeling for is that same sensation, that kind of movement with a little bit of clicking. Now, if you feel a little bit of a clicking sound or a clunking sound, it could also be your upper ball joint. So that's why we're doing the 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position, checking for the same kind of clicking or moving sensation. Now, some bad bearings may not have much play. So another way to actually diagnose them is to rotate the wheel while holding on to your coil here. So you can grab onto the coil, put your vehicle in neutral, and make sure it's at a four-wheel drive, and then just rotate your front tire. If you feel kind of a vibration going through your coil here, it could very well be that your wheel bearing is bad. So if you hear howling and humming on the highway, jack up your vehicle, you spin your tire and you feel that vibration, then it's likely your wheel bearing. But it's always a good idea to check your brake pads and your rotors to make sure that they're not grinding and coming into contact with each other, because that could also cause strange vibrations. But the wheel bearing will be a howling or humming sound, which is different than a grinding sound. All right, ball joints. If a ball joint is going bad, you may hear a squeaking or creaking sound while turning the wheel back and forth. This is unfortunately very common with the upper control arms, especially if you have SPC upper control arms. They had a whole bunch of bad ball joints with those. Another sound you might hear if a ball joint is going bad is a clunking sound when going over bumps. All right, so how do we assess this? Well, you're gonna wanna use a pry bar, and an assistant can be very helpful for this one. Let's jump into how to assess the lower ball joint first, then we'll move on to the upper ball joint. All right, so right here is our lower control arm ball joint. There should not be any play between where this mounts to the knuckle and the lower control arm. So right in here, we shouldn't see any movement within this joint. It should just kind of rotate back and forth, but there shouldn't be any up and down play. If there is, it's loose and it will make a clunking sound. So a good way to test for this is to have a partner take a pry bar, or you can do it yourself, and go under the tire and push up and down. As you can see, it's solid. It's moving as one whole unit. Basically, if it's bad, you'd pry up like this, and you would see movement in this joint. You'd see this start to move in, and then eventually that would kind of move as one. And yeah, there's no movement there in that ball joint. So that ball joint is good. All right, so here is our upper control arm ball joint. It's connected to our upper control arm, and it connects to our steering knuckle. So we wanna make sure there's no play in here. Any play in here would indicate that this is loose and has play and is obviously worn out. So a good way to check for this is you can use a pry bar, put it on the coil spring, put it on the bottom of the lower control arm, and just kind of pry up and look for movement in that joint as you kind of pry up and down. And you can do that from the top as well, same thing, but prying downwards this time, being careful not to damage your shock. I can see just a little bit of play in there. Another way to confirm this is to jack up your lower control arm a little bit, and then I can rock this back and forth. And if I feel kind of a clunking sound, it might indicate that it's worn out. Yeah, I can actually see a little bit of play in this joint. So this is just starting to wear out, just barely. I don't know if you can see that, but there's just a little bit of movement. It's not moving as one full component. Now, to confirm this, I could use my mechanic stethoscope, and I'm just gonna rock back and forth while listening. There's definitely a clicking sound happening. So this upper control arm's this ball joint here is just starting to go bad. So I'll have to unbolt this and replace this. I think they're pretty cheap, but that's an issue that's just starting right there. So we found that out, so that's good. All right, so control arm bushings. With bad control arm bushings, you will hear a clunking sound when braking, accelerating, or reversing. The steering wheel may shake or vibrate while turning or accelerating. You may also feel your steering wheel pull to one side slightly when applying your brakes. Your vehicle will likely wander on the road. To assess for bad control arm bushings, basically move your steering wheel back and forth and then look for excessive play. So it also helps to have somebody assist you here to move that steering wheel back and forth while you actually look at the bushings in the back. What you will notice is the control arm moving back and forth, and you can, if you get a flashlight, you can look inside, and what you're looking for is tears inside that bushing. You want to see that bushing, it could be dried out, cracking, and it will kind of be pulling away from itself. A bit of play is normal, but excessive play indicates bad control arm bushings. You may also notice a sound coming from them or that area. So it's also a good idea to check the torque specs on those bolts, especially if you've had work done in your vehicle, an alignment, a lift, anything like that, because quite often they aren't torqued enough and they may be moving around, making a sound, especially when you hit bumps. I think they're both supposed to be torqued to about 129 foot-pounds of torque. So yeah, always confirm that those are torqued properly if you are getting a clunking sound coming from that area as well. All right, so our tie rods, which are right here. With a bad tie rod, you may hear squeaking, popping, or clunking when turning the wheel. You may notice a delayed steering response when trying to turn your wheel. You may notice also uneven tire wear. This could be caused by either the outer or inner tie rod or both. So to assess for a bad tie rod, you'd want to start by grabbing your wheel at the 3 and 9 o'clock position again and rocking back and forth. You'll be listening for a popping or clunking sound or excessive play. Next, we can remove the wheel and visually inspect for torn boots on the inner outer tie rod. So check this boot, check the boot here. And if the boot is torn and dirt has got in there, it's likely gonna make the joint go bad. To confirm the joint is bad, try twisting the tie rod while looking for movement and play in the joints. After that, what you wanna do is you wanna try to grab it and move it back and forth. If you can see or feel movement or play, or you start hearing a clunking sound, the outer tie rod is bad. For the inner tie rod, you can assess it by holding the tie rod and have someone move the steering wheel back and forth while you listen and feel for noises. You can also disconnect the outer tie rod and move it in and out manually. So disconnect it here, grab it and move it like this. If you feel any excessive play, hear any clunking, then your tie rod has gone bad. All right, sway bar end links. With bad sway bar end links, you'll hear a very fast-paced rattle or clunking sound. This is because the small little joints at the end of the links will be getting loose and moving around. Get this fixed right away, because if this fails and they come apart, this can completely damage other components like your CV axles by tearing open the boots. So definitely get these fixed. To test for bad end links, you can have somebody rock the vehicle back and forth while you hold and listen with your mechanic stethoscope. You can also grab the sway bar itself and push it up and down and listen for a clunking sound. You could also remove the link and pull on the suspected joints and look for play, and you will notice the play quite easily. And just by grabbing your sway bar and going like this, you should hear a clunking sound, or grabbing the actual link itself and just moving it back and forth. Now it will kind of rotate back and forth because there's a joint there, but it shouldn't have any sort of clunking movement or play in that joint coming in and out. So that's how you test these sway bar end links. All right, the shocks or struts. So it's always a good idea to check your lower bushings here where they mount onto the lower control arm. You want to make sure that these are in good shape, no cracking in that bushing, and that they are nicely centered in that bolt there. And also inspect your shocks for any leaking oil to indicate that they are starting to fail. All right, so CV axles. So with a bad CV axle, you will hear a clicking sound while turning. You can test this in an empty parking lot. Basically turn your wheel all the way hard to the left and start doing circles, then repeat the process in the opposite direction. If you hear a clicking sound while you're doing the circles, your CV joint is starting to go bad and should be replaced. If you hear the sound and feel feedback in your steering wheel, then it needs to be replaced ASAP, as it is badly damaged. To identify which CV it is, just roll down your window and you should be able to listen out the right side and the left side and identify which one it is. It is also good to inspect the CV boots for tears. If the CV boot is torn, likely you have grime and dirt in there, which will cause the joint to fail, and therefore it should be replaced if it has a torn boot. All right, so if you've gotten to this part of the video and you still have sounds that you haven't diagnosed, let's just talk about some random noises that you may experience. So squeaking or creaking sounds while driving. The wheel well mud guards have these plastic clips that can cause squeaking or a creaking sound over time. The solution is to basically remove the mud guard and the clips, place double-sided foam over the spot where the clip's secured to the body, and reinsert the clips. All right, another good place to check is your skid plates. Quite often you'll hear a creaking sound or a metal pinging sound if your skid plate bolts are loose or stripped. I like to use a bit of blue Loctite on these bolts just to keep them secure, but don't over tighten these because they do strip easily. All right, so the hood latch or rubber spacer supports can also make a squeaking or creaking sound. So using some grease on the latch and adjusting the rubber spacers to the correct height can alleviate this issue. All right, guys, those are some of the most common suspension noises you might hear and how to troubleshoot them. If you've identified the issue and have the tools and knowledge to fix it, great. But if you're unsure and the problem persists, it's always good to have a professional mechanic involved. Remember, maintaining your suspension is key to the safety and overall performance of your Toyota, so don't ignore these strange noises. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope to come up with a lot more videos, and I always appreciate your guys' support. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye now.